This program is a presentation of UCTV for educational and non-commercial use only.
I'm very pleased to have with us today our distinguished guest, Dr. Bruce Alberts. Bruce is a leading biochemist. For those of you who are in his area, you probably know him extremely well from his years as a faculty in biochemistry at UCSF. But also he has been very well known nationally and internationally for in addition to his science in his area, also to his contributions to science education and to science in general. He is the editor-in-chief of Science, and in fact, he's one of the 3 United States Science Envoys appointed by President Obama. As I said, he is a faculty member, Professor Emeritus in the Department of Biochemistry and Biophysics at UCSF. And he returned back to UCSF in 2005 after he served 2 6-year terms as president of the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. I've met Bruce through my affiliation with AAAS, and I can only say that he brought to science the quality of his own work and his own perspective, which is so unique, and we all enjoy sharing. So we are very pleased to have him with us today. And as I said, we will have his presentation. We'll take some questions, and then not too many, so we can have time for the panel. And then we will introduce the panel and have a discussion from there. And the panel will be moderated by Ken Burtis, who is the Dean of our College of Biological Sciences. So Bruce, thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. So I just came from China, 8 days in China. I'm very jet-lagged, and the talk I'm going to give you very quickly is basically the same talk I gave in China, with a few slides inserted and a few taken out. And basically, I view my trips to China, which I go several times a year, as science diplomacy, even though I've not been assigned to China as a science envoy. But I think international connections through science are just critical for the future of the United States and for the future of the world. So what I'm going to do is talk about what can science do for the world, where does new knowledge come from, and how do we keep science healthy and maximally productive, a very important issue for every university and every scientific institution. I'll start with a little personal history very quickly, and then I'll focus on some important policies for strengthening science around the world, and hopefully in the discussion we can explore these and other issues in more detail. So I was a high school student when this famous picture was taken with Jim Watson, 25 years old. It changed our view of genetics completely, and ushered in an era of molecular biology, which I lived through. And it was a wonderful life in science, because we ended up discovering so much more than we ever thought we could discover about how life works. This is just an aging photograph. If you want to study aging, that's a good photograph. As he aged, I worked, and many other people worked on the mechanism that they predicted for copying genetic information, which they didn't know the machinery of. And I tried to work on the machinery, and it was, as in any life in science, it was solving puzzles, and it was a wonderful experience. I used a model organism, something I strongly recommend to young scientists. If you could understand humans by working on a model organism first, you're going to have a shortcut to major breakthroughs. And This is a virus that infects the bacterium E. coli. Max Delbruck, the famous physicist who came to the United States from Germany and sort of was a moral force leading the new molecular biology revolution, encouraged people to work on this organism. And to cut short, after many years of work in my lab and other labs, we discovered that DNA is replicated not as we had thought by one protein or one enzyme, but by a protein machine. In my case, it was made up of 7 different proteins that each was produced by this large bacterial virus. And the reason why replication is more complicated than it might otherwise be is that the 2 strands of the DNA double helix, as Watson and Crick discovered, run in opposite chemical directions. That is, they're anti-parallel. And so although one DNA on one side could be copied by this enzyme DNA polymerase that we originally thought was all that would be needed to copy DNA, that one strand, the so-called leading strand, could be made continuously. This thing could just run along for millions of base pairs copying the template. On the other side, you have to make that side backwards. There's a series of short fragments. That's called the lagging strand. And as you'll see in a little movie I'm going to show you in a second, that means a very discontinuous formation of a loop and breaking up a loop and reforming it. And this is very much like a sewing machine that goes zippering along the DNA, in my case, when at 500 nucleotides per second. We know that life is possible because of protein machines. There are thousands of different types of protein machines in each cell of our bodies, each with a different function. Many of them are not yet understood. We know their components, but not how they work. And so there's great challenges for young scientists. I guess I wish I was young again so I could work on another one. The fact is that evolution developed in biology protein machines for the same reason that humans invented machines, that assemblies with moving parts are much more effective for doing any job than a single tool. So think of the difference between a hammer and a complicated machine that, say, puts a bottle top on a milk bottle. And something that impressed me when I was a young kid when I went to look in Chicago at a machinery, at a place that, at a industry that made milk. So I'm going to show you a movie that was actually produced because of the celebration of the 50th years of DNA double helix. Jim Watson raised the money for it. Bruce Stillman, who works on DNA replication in Cold Spring Harbor, actually was the force behind this actual movie. And I show it because it shows how all life works. And it's really a beautiful thing to watch. But it's the other thing you should think about while you're watching is that this is going on in billions of cells in your body as you're sitting there. If it wasn't happening, you'd be dead. And most importantly, this is the way all the processes inside our cells work in principle. Different details, but same principle. Okay.
Using computer animation based on molecular research, we are able to picture how DNA is replicated in living cells. You are looking at an assembly line of miniature biochemical machines that are pulling apart the DNA double helix and cranking out a copy of each strand. The DNA to be copied enters the production line from bottom left. The whirling blue molecular machine is called a helicase. It spins the DNA as fast as a jet engine as it unwinds the double helix into 2 strands. One strand is copied continuously and can be seen spooling off to the right. Things are not so simple for the other strand because it must be copied backwards. It is drawn out repeatedly in loops and copied one section at a time. The end result is 2 new DNA molecules.
So that's my favorite movie because I worked on this for 30 years, and finally, when we came to understand it, of course, it's a really beautiful thing. And this gets to the point about the beauty of science, which is something we fail to convey to kids in science education, but we must convey. This is a quote from Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, who gave a talk to high school teachers, and he said, "The world looks so different after learning science. For example, trees are made of air primarily. When they are burned, they go back into air, and in the flaming heat is released the flaming heat of the sun, which was bound in to convert the air into tree. And in the ash is a small remnant of the part which did not come from air, that came from the solid earth instead. These things are beautiful things, and the content of science is wonderfully full of them. They are very inspiring, and they can be used to inspire others." So that was my career in science, very quickly abbreviated. And then suddenly I got called to go to Washington, a full-time job, a shift from science to science policy. I left in 1993. My lab closed in 1995. And I got a great education in Washington. Life is an education at what we now call the National Academies, Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and the National Research Council, which is a so-called operating arm that allows the National Academies to bring in teachers, lawyers, anything else we need for the work that we do. And the main function of the National Academies is to produce policy advice, independent policy advice to the government, more than 200 reports a year. And the very critical thing is that we don't negotiate the results with the government agency that requested a study. We release the full text to the press and to the public on our website when the report is delivered to the government. And this was the hardest part of my job, because governments don't like to know the truth often. And they would think of all kinds of reasons, national security, this, that, and the other thing, why we should either change the report or just give it to them secretly. And I got lots of people mad. And, but of course, it's important that government know the truth. Interesting, when I said that in China 3 days ago, the audience clapped. It was really amazing. So this is the website. When I came to the Academy in 1993, there was no web. 1994, the web was invented. It's perfect for the Academy because we've been producing all these reports. They're going on all the dusty libraries. And now there are 4,000 bits of science advice that are available to anyone around the world. You know, how much arsenic in drinking water should be allowed? How dangerous is it? Are electromagnetic fields dangerous? All these issues that policymakers need, and this website's widely used around the world. So my basic lesson from 12 years in Washington is that it's critically important that science and scientists achieve a much higher degree of influence throughout both their nations and the world. And basically, the other way of saying this is science is more important than most scientists think. In particular, I think we need much more of the creativity, rationality, openness, and tolerance that are inherent to science. What the first Prime Minister of India in 1950, Prime Minister Nehru, called a scientific temper for both the U.S. and all other nations. This is my favorite quote. It's from a wonderful book, still in print, by the physicist Jacob Bronowski, called Science and Human Values. Bronowski flew over Hiroshima and Nagasaki shortly after the bomb was dropped because he was working for the Army, and it profoundly made him wonder whether science was good or bad for the world. He spent 10 years reading and thinking about it, and then he produced this wonderful analysis. And he said, "The society of scientists is simple because it has a directing purpose to explore the truth. Nevertheless, it has to solve the problem of every society, which is to find a compromise between the individual and the group. It must encourage the single scientist to be independent and the body of scientists to be tolerant. From these basic conditions, which form the prime values, there follows step by step a range of values: dissent, freedom of thought and speech, justice, honor, human dignity, and self-respect. Science has humanized our values. Men have asked for freedom, justice, and respect precisely as the scientific spirit has spread among them." So after this 10 years of reading and thinking, he concluded that science, on balance, was very good for the world. So to generate a scientific temper for a nation, we need good science education for all. This is what science should look like in school. This is actually taken in a San Francisco middle school, kids working in groups, a noisy classroom, teacher as coach. We call this a science inquiry. This is a document that the Academy produced when I was the president, trying to explain what inquiry was. We needed to do that because our teachers had never, most of the teachers had never experienced inquiry themselves when they went to college and took college science. And that's a major issue. To remove a major barrier to progress, and I think this is the barrier to progress after working on this issue for 30 years, science education at the college level must change. When I got to the Academy, my members, many of them didn't want us to work on science education because said it was not our problem. It's the problem of the unions, it's the problems of the states, problem of the textbook publishers. Well, of course, all those things are problems. This is from an early Academy report which shows a network of interactions in this complex system. Notice that so many of the arrows, almost all of them, point at the poor teachers. But one of those critical arrows, and I think really the most important one, is us. The faculties of arts and science who teach the parents and the teachers the last science course they will ever take. And if that is biology 1, my field, and it's all memorizing, learning what scientists have discovered about the world, and not understanding what science is, then these teachers and the parents who are trying to help their kids don't understand what science education is or should be. So an important barrier to progress is a traditional lecture format, which all of us who are professors were good at. We were great at this. We got the A's. That's why we're professors. But many people don't learn this way. And it allows, of course, very efficient batch processing of many hundreds of students through an introductory science class. And the question is, how can we create much better alternatives without a great increase in cost? And I know that at least your physics department is doing that. I learned that from a student at lunch today. But here's an example of what the Academy tried to do. We organized a summer school that's been going on for years now at University of Wisconsin. It was organized by Joel Handelsman and Bill Wood. Ken Burtis is teaching in that course, so you have a major presence. And this is me learning how to use clickers. This is one technique that is useful for even large lecture courses. And then after that, I introduced clickers to the medical school curriculum that I was teaching at UCSF. This is a much more ambitious development at the University of Minnesota, where they just opened a new science building with 10 no-lecture science classrooms. This is a classroom with 22 tables, each with 9 chairs and 2 computers and an overhead screen over each table. And the teacher can then shift as she or he wants to show the same thing on all the screens from one student. So they've been teaching biology 1 like this for years, and they have really nice data showing how effective this is in getting kids to actually understand science and to think differently about what science is. So my current obsession at Science Magazine is using science broadly and Science Magazine, science with a capital S, to create more coherence in the field of education. And I call this really redefining science education because so many adults think that science education is memorizing science words. And we need to redefine what science is, and the Academy still is working very hard on that issue today. I want to shift to this other critical issue. Of course, for our nations to benefit from science, we must keep science healthy. And we have to ask ourselves, what defines good science? Science must continually generate innovative new ideas and technologies. Science is really a creative endeavor, much like being an artist. We must therefore focus much more intensely on stimulating and rewarding innovation and risk-taking, both at the universities and nationally. What will innovation require? Of course, we need to recruit the most talented young people to science and engineering careers. We need to provide them with the best possible undergraduate and graduate training. Just as an aside, I'm just telling the Chancellor that as you go around the world, you realize how unique our universities are, our great universities like this one. It's amazing how many ways there are to mess up a university. As you go around the world, you just see this. And so this is one of the great benefits the United States has to give to the world. Third, providing merit-based funding for risk-taking research and education. We don't do that enough. And of course, structuring our scientific institutions to maximize innovation. And when you think about it, this is something I learned actually. Why is, I didn't learn this till I was Academy president, I didn't think about it. Why is science exploding? Why is it moving faster and faster? It's because science builds new knowledge on old knowledge. And the more knowledge we have, the more different ways we can combine old knowledge to make new things. And there's a combinatorial mathematics. 100 units of knowledge can be combined in 100 times more ways than can 10 units of knowledge. And it's really that explains the exponential increase in advances in science. And the simplest way to think about this is all the new methodologies, the new ways of doing DNA sequencing, mass spectrometry, all those tools that come from understanding the world better from previous knowledge acquired by science and engineering. There's a catch, though, and it's very important for institutions to think about this. As knowledge grows, it becomes increasingly difficult to find the right combinations, the ones that are going to be productive. And this is a wonderful quote from the distinguished French mathematician Henri Poincaré. The source of creativity in science. To create consists precisely in not making useless combinations and making those which are useful and which are only a small minority. Invention is discernment choice. Among chosen combinations, the most fertile will often be formed of elements drawn from domains which are far apart. The true work of the inventor consists in choosing among these combinations so as to eliminate the useless ones. And of course, the vast majority are useless. This is why at UCSF we're trying to get graduate students, if they only can go to one seminar, go to a seminar in a field that's not your own. Go to a seminar that's different and try to learn different approaches to science, new ideas, so you could do something unique. Here's the problem that we all face. Basically, I write a textbook every 5 years, and my text happens to be in cell biology. And when you do that, you see that there's all these wonderful problems that nobody's working on with modern methods, and there's all the other fields that are really overcrowded, people racing each other to publish 2 weeks earlier than somebody else. And the reason for that is easy to understand. Why do we have all these overcrowded experimental spaces and yet unexplored spaces that really are not getting the attention they deserve? This is where, of course, where the opportunities are for young people. The reason is because, of course, famous Professor X has lots of students and postdoctoral fellows. They then go out and get jobs, and they try to work on something because of the way our system works, that's closely related to what they did before. And then they have students, and they do the same thing. And so we get all these people working on certain areas. We're almost like, we laugh about fashion. Scientists laugh about fashion, but we do the same thing. And by just working on the explored, overcrowded spaces. And so we need to, I call that training inertia. And so we need to recognize that and try to compensate for it. So then how should research be organized to stimulate innovation? Here's what I think. Not everybody agrees with me, of course. I think in general we should encourage our institutions to support a set of laboratories of modest size, 9 to 12 people, each headed by an outstanding, innovative, independent investigator. These laboratories should be clustered, embedded in a cooperative culture in which techniques and equipment are freely shared. At UCSF, we build spaces where, big labs are filled with students and postdocs from multiple groups. I'm in a little office space with professors from 4 other departments, 5 professors from 4 departments. Every time I want to go off to the men's room, I have to walk by the students who are sitting in the lounge, either reading or eating or talking. In other words, random collisions are important, and everything must be done to encourage a random collision of people and ideas. And of course, the leaders of departments must encourage risk-taking and originality. Otherwise, people will do the safe science that is not going to produce much in the way of innovation. So I'd like to sort of end by talking about how do we spread a scientific temper throughout the world. And this is a really big task. First of all, scientists need to get organized. We're not very well organized. When I was Academy president, my first year, I went to a meeting in India. It was the first ever gathering of all the science academies of the world. That was 1993. And at that meeting was organized something called the Inter-Academy Panel, IAP. It's now a network of 100 science academies. All the world is covered except for these orange areas. And part of the IAP mission is to create academies in these places where they do not have them. And then the Inter-Academy Panel is a network is trying to help each academy be more ambitious, to develop a larger role in their own societies, including becoming a respected advisor to their own governments, because many academies, for example, some of the old academies in Europe are basically just honorary places where old men come to eat lunch. What we need is active academies that actually are influencing their nations. And we're also working together to share information and resources as public goods to strengthen world science. For example, resources for science education. This is an editorial that was published a few years ago in Science by Jorge Allende, the former president of the Chilean Academy, who's been leading a inter-academy panel effort to spread active science learning for children. We call it inquiry science education for children around the world by sharing best practices and running training sessions for countries that don't know what this kind of science is. And I'm really talking now about science for all. I learned about this also as Academy president. Here I am in near the Lake Victoria among subsistence farmers. This is a subsistence farmer. This is a African scientist. Subsistence farmers don't wear ties. But this is from a small village that had been going for hundreds of years through periods of starvation every year when they ran out of food. And because of local scientists teaching them through on-farm research how to grow corn, you can see they were very successful. They now had excess food and were able to sell it no longer starving. So this technology, agricultural technology, was critical for improving lives. Here's a very different situation, Pondicherry, India, rural India. This house here is volunteered by the village as a place where wireless internet facilities are made available to everyone in the village. Here I am with one of the women who volunteers who ran the center. They call them village knowledge workers. Wireless internet is bringing them information from scientists, information that they want to help improve their livelihoods. This is an example. This kind of connection allowed groups of rural women to produce biopesticides, parasitic moth eggs, which then protected their health by getting them away from chemical pesticides in these villages, and secondly, allowed them to earn a livelihood by selling these trichogramma parasitic insects in the marketplace. And there are many other examples, growing mushrooms, dairies, and so on. This is a project that was started by a famous Indian scientist, M.S. Swaminathan, about 20 years ago. And it shows really what science can do, even for the most deprived areas, most poor areas of the world. So this is my picture of Academy presidents to make the point that the promise of world science collaboration comes from the fact that scientists in every country have the same values and the same way of wishing that their governments would make better long-term decisions. And basically, because we share respect for evidence and rationality, we can work together extremely well. If you look at the cups, this is a Swiss McDonald's at 7 o'clock in the morning. There were actually 15 Academy presidents in the room, but they're not all in the picture. This is Sweden, India, China, Japan. And the point is that we are, despite our political differences, we are really very compatible with regard to how we want the world to pay attention to science and how we want each of our own governments to behave. This is a newer development. Every year, the Inter-Academy panel has been bringing 2 scientists from each nation that wants to send scientists to the World Economic Forum that's so-called Summer Davos. It's held in China every year. And these are some of the young scientists, 35 years old, basically, who've now banded together to try to create a international force for science using younger people, the next generation of leaders. And they generated the idea of spreading young academies. A young academy was first developed in Germany about 10 years ago, where the older academies chose something like 100 of their best younger scientists, told them, go do something for your country. And each of those people were appointed for a rotating period of 5 years. And that experiment turned out to be enormously useful in creating spreading science in Germany. It was then reproduced in the Netherlands, and now it's being spread throughout the world by an association that some of these young people formed specifically for this purpose, called a Global Young Academy, now centered and formed in Berlin. So the urgent need for capacity building is something that I'm very well aware of. I'm currently serve as President Obama's Science Envoy to Indonesia. There's a lot we can do from the United States to help them develop capacity. And basically, those of us in more scientifically advanced nations must help less advanced nations to develop a greater capacity in science and technology as appropriate to their national needs. Every nation needs science for agriculture, science for environment, science for health, and so on. And this is in our own interest as well as being critical for the rest of the world. I was just in China with the purpose of trying to get China and the United States to collaborate, Chinese and United States scientists, particularly young scientists, to see if we could get strong collaborations going between us to try to work elsewhere around the world to spread this kind of capacity. So my last slide is just a wonderful quote from Louis Pasteur. "Science knows no country, knowledge belongs to humanity. It's the torch that illuminates the world." Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. We are very pleased to have Jody Nunari, Professor and Chair of Molecular and Cellular Biology here, and also a UC Davis Chancellors Fellow, and Don Sumner, Professor of Geology and also UC Davis Chancellors Fellow, to come in conversation with Bruce about science. And I wanted to say just a few things about the Chancellors Fellow group we have. These are our best faculty who are recognized for their ideas and their work, and they are given this recognition as a fellow. And we really enjoy their participation in many events, and of course, through that activity and through that group, we try to highlight their work and give them a great environment in which they can succeed. So if I could ask Jody's right here, and Don to come forward. And Ken Burtis, where is Ken? There. Ken is going to facilitate the discussion. Thank you, Ken. You can come this way, and then, or you're sitting down. All right.
Thank you, Chancellor. So that was a very wide-ranging talk. It covered everything from your spectacular career in science through your contributions to scientific education and to science around the world. It seems like there's probably no shortage of things that Don and Jody might talk about. So I think perhaps just to give them the opportunity to stimulate conversation first, I'll have each of them present a few thoughts. Don, perhaps you could begin, and then we'll move to a moderated question and answer session.
Yeah, so I really appreciated the diverse perspectives you brought together in science and education, and I think most of the faculty here want to do sort of share and spread the science, and one of the things that a lot of us deal with is sort of that balance between the research productivity and sharing that knowledge. the university is structured so that we teach classes. But one of the things I really found interesting about UCSF was that need to collide and share, and that brings in sort of the physical presence and that importance. But then you also have wireless connections in India. And I performed an accidental outreach experiment where I tried to make some educational tools for the students in my classrooms by making short YouTube videos. I didn't post them on YouTube, I posted them on my website, but the students couldn't download them because of the format, so I put them on YouTube starting about 7 years ago. And I now have over 100,000 views from people ranging from Zambia. I'm particularly popular in Pakistan. High school students here. And so you end up with that outreach, but it's so different from that interaction when you deal with students. And I was wondering how you see that balance going forward.
So if you talk about K12 education, I think we need some drastic changes. I have grandchildren. All my kids went to public schools in San Francisco. Now I have 5 grandchildren in public schools in San Francisco, and the world has changed so dramatically for them. I still remember when I was in school, school was the most interesting thing in my life because at home there was nothing. I mean, there's no TV. I'd scrounge around for a book to read, but now my grandchildren have access to the whole world on the internet, and to them, school is so much less interesting than it was for me. And I think we need to unleash our kids, our young people, to do more creative things. I wrote an editorial in Science about 6 months ago based on my own experience with Boy Scouts. At one point, I was a Boy Scout, and then I was a Boy Scout leader when I was in college. And Boy Scouts have merit badges where they have over 100 different choices you could choose from, and you work on something intensely. Like there's one called Plant Sciences, which I use as a prototype. And each of these merit badges have been developed, for over many, many years, and they're actually quite interesting to do. You do something in depth, and you have lots of choices. You don't memorize stuff. You do something, and then you write it up. And in the end, there's some adult that you go talk to who is called a volunteer, who basically tests that you can do this. And this is I think we could open up our education system to allow kids to do some of this kind of thing in part of school. It'd be so wonderful. We'd get the kids to actually do something in depth instead of memorizing. My grandson he's going to college next year. He wants to be a scientist, but the worst course he ever took, he said, was high school biology. And all his friends felt the same way. All they did was they memorized names. For example, he said he memorized all the parts of a flower. I said, did you ever look at a flower? No. It was done from the picture in the textbook. I mean, we've made education so dull, and No Child Left Behind has driven things in the wrong direction for most kids to a testing environment. So I just think that our universities, our great universities, have to get more deeply engaged in what's happening to young people before they come to the university and try to open up the system so that education for young people becomes as exciting as it was for me. For me, it could outcompete the other distractions in their lives. And there's so many resources. Your videos, for example, could be part of a merit badge. It wouldn't be called a merit badge. It could be I said Science Challenge Award or something. And one of the things they could do is work with your videos and other people's videos. There's all these wonderful resources that we're not taking advantage of. California should end their textbook adoption process. I mean, it's just dreadful. Texas and California, and I guess a few other states, but we have a huge textbook lobby in Sacramento. It's all driven by money, and you know, we have it because adults are making money out of it now. It doesn't make any sense. And the state's wasting money, and we're torturing kids because these textbooks, in order to sell them to many different states, have to match the California standards, the Texas standards, and they're worse than they ever were because they have more information and less space. And so I think I would like to challenge everybody with kids to take one of their science textbooks and actually try to, if you look at it, it looks good. It's got lots of pictures. Just take any chapter in the middle and try to read it. And I think you'll find it's the most dreadful kind of thing you've ever seen. It's almost the hardest thing, hardest book you'd ever read because it doesn't have enough information to make sense. One of my I'm going on too long, but I always use the example. The endoplasmic reticulum is one of the parts of the cell that every 7th grader in California is supposed to know according to the standards. I didn't learn about the endoplasmic reticulum until I was in graduate school, but now we think by forcing more and more difficult things to lower and lower levels, we're doing a better job of education. And I guess my bottom line is less the people in this room and everybody else like us, the universities pay much closer attention to what's happening to our young people. We're going to have a real problem in the future with kids who hate school, hate education, and will not be able to compete in the world.
Jody.
So what I found interesting maybe to discuss is the role that scientists play just by doing what we do in shaping society and the values and our cultures that we all share. And that's an interesting thing to think about. But as scientists and through our ability to innovate and create things, we also challenge society too, and the ethics that we think about in society. And I think a challenge that's on us all now is with our next-gen sequencing abilities and the ability to sequence human genomes, and how we're all going to handle that, and what kind of discussions that we need to have, and what you think the role of us as scientists. What are our roles in this discussion that we need to have now?
So I'm just, there's a great hero of mine was the man who wrote my first biology textbook. I got to Harvard College. I had never taken any biology because I, as usual, had signed up late for a high school class and it was full. But maybe that was fortunate. So a great man, John A. Moore, who some of you will know, invented this science as a way of knowing movement. He wrote this textbook called Principles of Zoology that I got in 1957 as a textbook at Harvard, and it was so much better than the lectures I was getting. And I volunteered when he died in 2002 to write his memoirs for the Academy, and his wife is now 96, and I'm getting emails every week from his daughter, why didn't you finish? So I've been working on it just this week and last week. I'm almost done, but it reminds me, it's very inspiring because that post-Sputnik generation, which he represented, he was the leader of the BSCS Yellow Version Biology textbook. They spent something like 2 months every summer holed up, a bunch of scientists and lots of teachers just working in a very idealistic way to improve science education for kids. And his point was, by science as a way of knowing, what's important is to get children and adults, of course, eventually, to understand that science is a special way of knowing about the world. It's based on evidence and logic, and those kinds of skills are needed by everybody to be able to deal with the complex world we live in, to not be fooled by every internet scam that comes across, or by politicians, or talk radio and television commentators who always seem to have simple answers for complicated problems. And scientists, if you're trained as a scientist, you don't believe in that stuff, but so many people do. And in a democracy, I think our democracy is in danger if we don't do a better job of taking all our kids and teaching them how to think like a scientist. They're not going to be scientists. And there are wonderful ways of doing this. And I just, since I've been working on this for 30 years, I don't think we're going to be able to accomplish this without getting PhD scientists into important positions in school districts to be our connectors and our advocates. And every school district needs a person who feels as passionately about science as most of us do. Most school districts don't have anybody like that in their leadership, and many of them are afraid of scientists. And so I think as a strategy, every scientist wants to solve hard problems, but we learned that we need a strategy. You just can't try to go head on to a scientific problem. And so being a good scientist is all about having a good strategy. I think a good strategy to focus on would be try to get some of our best students transferred and trained to be science curriculum leaders in school districts, to be the connectors we need between the scientific community and the K12 system. Because without that, I don't think we're going to be able to succeed. There's too much noise in the system. I've been through a situation where in San Francisco, we had a Superintendent, Ray Cortinas, who was terrific when I was 1980s, who really passionately believed in inquiry science in the schools. And UCSF had a major program. We got all this stuff going in the school system. But then he leaves and everything decays to the lowest energy level, which is, memorize the textbook, spit back the words. So I think part of the mission that we should be, the answer to Jody's question is that we need to transfer scientists, some of our best scientists, and train them and find a way to get them into positions of responsibility in our K-12 system. Otherwise, we will continually go back and forth as we've gone for many years. And we can't get enough energy into the system. So basically, I view the education system as like a chemical system. It decays to right now, it decays to the lowest free energy minimum whenever you take away all the, outside force on it. With outside force, in my case, was I got a grant from the NSF. We had trained 100 teachers, elementary teachers in San Francisco for 5 years, and all that stuff was great. But then we went away, and it went away. So I think we need, as faculty, we need to think differently about our students. I just was this morning in Sacramento meeting with the 10 fellows, PhD scientists who've been chosen to work in the California State Legislature. I don't know if you know about this program, but it's a mimic of the AAAS Fellowship Program in Washington that the Moore Foundation and other foundations are supporting. It sends 10 outstanding, highly selected scientists to work as staff for a year to Sacramento, right near you. And it's just very clear that they can make a huge difference as our connectors. If we want, already last year the first class is gone and 3 of them were permanently hired. And they're there. So if we leave 3 of them every year for 5 years, there'll be 15 of them. Then we'll have our connectors to the state legislature. We need the same thing for school districts. And the reason I refer to them, they're saying that the problem is my colleagues at the university, my professors, think I'm a failure because I'm doing this. And so long as we have that kind of an attitude, we're not going to be able to succeed in spreading science to school districts or to the legislature. So faculty have to change the way they think about what we're doing with our students. This is a critical issue for the future of science, and I think it's a critical issue for the future of the United States.
So I'd like to expand the conversation now to include the audience. If you have questions, I'll call on you, and if either of our panelists would like to add or stimulate further discussion in response to those questions, that'd be great as well. David.
Professor Alberts, thank you for coming. I often find myself in a situation where I have to try to promote progressive policies in education. So I was wondering if you could offer your perspective on two questions that I often get, which are related to why. So let's just say everyone in this room now has gone through what you might call a traditional science education of lectures, of textbooks, of memorizing things. And, you know, they're not doing so bad. We have members of the National Academy here. We have Howard Hughes scholars. Yeah. So how could we say that there's a strong mandate for dramatic change in our education? Yeah. Yeah. And a related question, the NIH NCI pay line this year, I think, is 7th percentile. And one might interpret that to say, there's already too many of us. So how could we say there's a strong mandate for trying to get more students interested in science? Yeah.
Well, let me talk about the last one first, because I'm deeply involved with that with our students at UCSF. I've often said that I don't think we could have too many PhD scientists, but they can't be all researchers, and they can't all be in industry, and we need to provide other pathways for them to go and do the kind of things I was just describing. So we need much more effort to help young people find careers where they could use their science in new ways. UCSF has just started for a few years. We've had a program that's experimental that, again, competitively allows every graduate student who wants to go to compete for support for 4 months to go to a non-academic place. Generally, it's like in their 4th year of graduate school. The idea is to make connections between academia and the world where scientists are needed and can work. Some of them have gone to, many of them have gone to biotech, but some have gone to, public radio, law firms, other places. And of course, when they come back, they're required to present to other graduate students what their experiences was. And the whole idea of this is really to open up the university, the science departments, to a wider range of career, respecting and understanding a wider range of careers. Most professors, most of my colleagues have nothing against any of these other things, but they don't know anything about them. And so they're not at all useful for advising students. At any rate, I think we need new ways of thinking about what we're doing in even training PhD scientists. If you think about somebody who's got a bachelor's in science and how they discriminate, how are they different from somebody who's got a PhD? I think they're dramatically different. I've trained lots of students. They actually understand science. They could interface with the scientific community as equal colleagues, and they can really communicate differently about science than somebody who's just got a bachelor's degree. So I don't think that research was at all wasted. But what we need is new ways of supporting students to make transitions to other careers, and once they're in those careers, to bring them back into our science departments so they can inform other students about other pathways. Of course, there are many things like this that already exist, like for policy work, both the National Academies and AAAS have these short experiences that have gotten many scientists and engineers to transition to policy careers, but we don't have them in enough other fields. So this issue about, well, we succeeded, so why do we have to change anything? As I learned at the Academy, different people have different learning styles, and of course, those of us who succeeded were good at that. we were all the ones who got the A's and A pluses by sitting in lectures and reading textbooks. And so we automatically assume that everybody else should be the same. But we know that not everybody learns in the same way. So we could reach a larger number of people if we actually teach differently. And I'm encouraged by the fact that there's a lot more energy going into doing research on these issues. Carl Wyman obviously has been quite effective. He just published a paper in Science, by the way, about an experiment done in a physics class. And here's a guy with a Nobel Prize. So we're starting to see that more and more scientists are starting to take this seriously and think more broadly about their teaching. And chancellors are very important. Shirley Tillman did a wonderful thing at Princeton. She's a scientist, a member of the Academy. She took an Academy report called Bio 2010, said that we need to train the next generation of biomedical sciences or biological scientists differently to be able to handle more quantitation, to be familiar with MATLAB and computers and all these kinds of things. And she's put resources into a 2-year development and gave faculty time to develop a completely new 2-year course of study for students who wanted to be scientists, specifically biological scientists. And it's an incredibly inventive program. It's been going on for, I think, 6 years now. It's quite successful. And that kind of thing is really important to spread to other universities. And innovation can happen if leadership provides support. And that's Shirley's a great example of something that that can be done more broadly. And it's very hard if I was at other places I won't mention where people were trying to do the right thing, but they felt the leadership wanted them to focus on getting more grant money, and were only measuring how much money was coming in from grants, and they were discouraging their efforts in education. So leadership is critically important. But I think you obviously have great leadership, and Davis has a great tradition of doing science that has made a difference for all kinds of parts of our society, agriculture, winemaking, all kinds of things. And it'd be great if you could do something like that in education.